Edward. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you getting on?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, good. Thanks very much for agreeing to jump on with us today and record the episode. Appreciate you making the hour or so commitment. Um, so great. Look, really excited to have you on today. For those that haven't tuned in the past, just to give you a little bit of an intro to what we're up to over here. My name's Simon Gregory. I'm a director of Thornton Gregory, and I have worked in the recruitment side of the space and sort of executive search side of the space for about 10 years. Um, we started around 18 to 24 months ago a series of episodes where we talked to operators in the space regarding different important topics around go-to-market, RevOps, sales enablement, and others. So just check out the other episodes that we've got across all of the platforms. But I guess the reason we're here today with Edward is because alongside the operators, we're also looking at like a bit more of a diverse perspective, and started to kind of explore SMEs and consultants that deliver different projects into the space. So we've got some cool episodes delivering there, and also other really important topics around things like neurodiversity, cognitive diversity, and things that we want to share a little bit of awareness on. And I just happened to get introduced to Edward via a sort of a mutual contact of ours, and it was a really happy coincidence that he's the position he holds and where he holds in the VC community. I thought it could be an excellent guest. So, Edward, thanks again for sharing your wisdom and your personal story around this topic today.
No problem. I'm always a bit concerned when somebody says share wisdom. I'm not sure I'm old enough to share any wisdom yet. Maybe in a
No,
few
fair
more
enough.
decades.
No, fair enough. Okay, cool. All right. Well, without any more ado, right? Just for the people that don't know you or know of you, can you share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my name's Edward Keelan. I work for the venture capital firm Octopus Ventures. So Octopus Ventures is one of the most active venture capital firms in Europe. We're part of the Octopus Group, so most people know us now for the little pink octopus energy things. But actually, Octopus Group was going a long time before Octopus Energy. So I've been at Octopus now for 16 years in total, so a good stint. And I look after what they call a fund, which is around about £500 million in size, making investments into fast-growing software companies. So that's what I do as my day job: look after the team and try and deploy money into some of the UK's most exciting companies.
Yeah, fascinating, fascinating. Okay, so for those that don't know you, um, sorry, for those that don't know you, can you share a little about why neurodiversity is an important topic to you, and also a little more about your personal journey?
Yeah, so the reason why this sort of topic came up was that I had done an executive MBA. This is almost a decade ago now. I'd done an executive MBA at Oxford University, and I did a LinkedIn post which said something around along the lines of managed to get a distinction in my executive MBA, not bad for a dyslexic. And then from there, lots of people started sort of asking me about it, saying, "Wow, I didn't realize you were dyslexic."
Yeah,
Being a partner in a venture capital firm is quite, I'm quite fortunate. It's quite a fortunate position, and a lot of people were surprised to see that. Off the back of that, I then wrote a blog. So I wrote a blog called The Dyslexic Investor, and The Dyslexic Investor was all about my sort of journey with dyslexia and how I went from effectively the remedial huts at school. So my educational journey definitely did not start at Oxford University. It started by being kicked out of the kind of main classrooms at school and being sent to the kind of dilapidated huts just in the playing fields where the kind of naughty children went. I wasn't naughty at all, but they didn't quite know what to do with me in the classroom because my spelling and my reading, etc., was quite so bad. So yeah, my educational journey starts there. And it really took me a long time to figure out how education would work for me and how I would learn. For a long time, sort of just thought of as not being that bright. and only really thanks to my mum fighting the educational system and bashing heads together from the age of about 8 years old. I was sort of put back in the classroom, and I sort of went on my journey through GCSEs and A levels, and eventually getting my masters from Oxford. So it's been a real journey, and obviously through that I've also built a career. I think for me, for a long time, I sort of held back telling people I was dyslexic. I probably had my own
Mm.
kind of demons and chips on my shoulder to deal with, and so it's really only the last maybe 6 or 7 years that I've really been quite outspoken, trying to talk about how we can think about neurodiversity differently within the workplace and within education, and hopefully making a tiny bit of difference in my little bit of the world.
Yeah, I've seen online and stuff. It's pretty visible. You do stuff in the schooling system as well, don't you? Go and talk at different schools across the country.
Yeah, I've done a lot of talks on dyslexia, and both within the schools. I've also talked to a lot of parents. I
Yeah,
think what's interesting is, for most 8 or 9 year olds, they've got no idea what you're talking about when you're talking about dyslexia. All
yeah,
they know is that they're failing on their spelling test compared to their mates, and it's really trying to sort of give some tools to the parents of dyslexic children, or with other neurodiversities, kind of, okay, well,
mm,
what's the mindset, how should I be thinking about this, what things should I put in place, um, and that's been quite powerful. So when I wrote my dyslexia blog, I found one of the things I found interesting is probably less feedback from people who were actually dyslexic, but a lot of feedback from parents of dyslexic children saying,
mm,
actually, this
mm,
gives me a little bit of hope that not all is not
mm.
lost. And unfortunately, the schooling system hasn't progressed nearly as much as you would have thought of over the last 3 decades or 4 decades. God, I am old. And so trying to give them some reassurance that being kind of identified as dyslexic or whatever that neurodiversity might be is not necessarily a life sentence.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome. You're obviously passionate about and big advocate for neurodiversity. Clearly, what personal experiences have shaped your view on the topic, and how has this influenced the work that you do within VCs and Octopus Ventures?
Yeah, I mean, lots. I mean, there's loads of stories that are both funny and some sad, and
Yeah.
so I think I originally, I think when I was first diagnosed with dyslexia, or identified, I don't like the term diagnosed because it
Mm,
sounds like it's a sort of some sort of disease that happens to you, whereas actually it's just a different mindset,
mm,
way your mind works. But I think originally, I probably, if I'm honest, I used it as a bit of a badge of excuse. So it was a good excuse to not necessarily have to achieve as much as I could potentially do, and I put all that, put a lot of that down to my dyslexia. Um, and it was actually only when I had a very good friend who was won the Stanford scholarship, who was a PhD at
mm,
Cambridge, who kind of called me out on the kind of negativity around it, and was just like, no, you're as smart as anyone I know. Like, you can actually achieve whatever you want to achieve. You just need to work hard enough. And throughout my life, actually, people have been like always sort of talking about my limitations, whereas he was the
mm.
first one that just kind of, I don't know if you're allowed to swear on this, Simon. I don't know if you're allowed to
Yeah,
swear.
you can do whatever you like within reason.
Yeah, so he was the one that called out the bullshit, and
Yeah,
so that was a big defining moment, because I, to have somebody like him who I had so much respect for
yeah.
to say that, go, okay, well maybe I need to readdress. But then, when I got into the workplace, my first job was, I don't mind calling him out because this is true, but my first job was at Rolls Royce. So I started as a commercial officer at Rolls Royce, and
Yeah.
within my induction week, there was the kind of well-meaning, I don't know what they were, some sort of training person was trying to teach us about how you go about managing different people with different kind of abilities.
Hmm.
And I remember her saying, if you've got a dyslexic, you shouldn't give them a computer, give them a hammer or something. And and my immediate thought was, oh my God, what happens if I'm the dyslexic, and a pretty heavy one at that? So, I wouldn't say that, my chip was pretty firmly on my shoulder already, but it definitely, those sorts of incidents reaffirmed to me, okay, like, just don't talk about the dyslexia, really sort of kind of hold that in as something that you have. And the other thing was that I'd mentioned it in a few interviews, and whenever I mentioned it in an interview, I immediately saw the face change of the interviewer, and I had never got the job. So the first, when I stopped mentioning it, all of a sudden I got job offers. It might be that might have been my own hang up. It might not be true, but it just felt that way. And so, yeah, it was only when I finally loosened the chip when I did the masters. And I think the reason why it was kind of a couple of fold. One, because I started to understand how my brain worked and how I learn. Like I could learn really well if I had much more intense kind of one-on-one tuition where I was being able to question things and I was being able to challenge stuff, and it wasn't sort of so classroom based, 50 people all trying to learn parrot fashion. That just does not work for me. And when I really, and luckily modern technology is such that, and with AI, it's going to be even more incredible for dyslexic children, that you can actually start to really get under the skin of topics and do it in such a way that is, you can question it. And then the other thing we did is we were asked to, and it sounds, I always knew there was some, I always figured that I had an ability to do something that others didn't. And it was very hard for me to put my finger on like what that was or to frame it, because if you're great at maths, then you get good at maths tests. If you're good at English, you get all your spellings right and your grammar's perfect and blah blah. But I was good at sort of just imagining how things should be and getting them in place and then organizing them. And it's like it's really hard to quantify that. But I'd actually found work generally quite easy. Whereas I found education hard, I seemed to just do well wherever I worked. Whatever job I had, I did well at it. And then we were asked to do these presentations around what motivates us. And the idea of the presentation was you had to draw up 20 slides. You spent, 20 seconds on each slide or 30 seconds on each slide, but the slide could only have a picture. And, this was part of my master's. And within sort of half an hour, I designed my slide deck, what motivates me, how it was all put together and all the rest of it. And I took it back up to the top of the class and I was like, I finished after about half an hour. And they were like, no, this is a whole day's task. And I was like, I don't need a whole day. Like, the way that my mind works, like if you give me,
amazing.
You ask me to design something in a process, or you ask me to design a business, or you ask me to, like, that's where my strength comes. And a lot of people sort of said that's a certain trait of dyslexics, that they are able to very quickly, maybe they don't get into they can't remember the detail, but they can see how it should all fit together in a big picture. And so that's, I guess that then in some ways felt like it released me for talking about my dyslexia.
And did that inform your career choices because you managed to understand that was a bit of a superpower?
No,
I.e.,
I don't. You don't know that when you're, you can't really. It's not really tangible at 16, 17 years old when you're thinking about career.
But when you're in the doing your masters and you realize you could sort of like, you could dilute down and solve these complex things very quickly, was that maybe would have made you a great fit within the VC sort of,
I already was in venture capital at the
route.
time, and part of the reason for doing it was part of the reason for doing my masters was I just had very smart people around me that had all been to Oxbridge and red brick universities, and I was sort of like, Jesus, like I somehow need to kind of justify my existence within this within this world. I think that dyslexia has more informed my love of entrepreneurship and my love of entrepreneurs. So the trouble with education is effectively it's somebody setting a test who's really good at doing those tests. That's how education works. It's like very good person, somebody's really good at spelling or really good at maths, sets a maths test or a spelling test or whatever the test might be because they're really good at this, and then they judge that child or that young person against that criteria that they're really good at. And that is, that to me has difficulties on its own, but also the wonderful thing about entrepreneurship is that you're the only person judging you is whether your idea is any good and whether people want to buy it and whether you're going to give up or you're going to carry on. And this is why I love entrepreneurs, because they genuinely put themselves out there. They say, look, I'm not going to do I'm going to do the ultimate test, which is I'm going to produce something something and see if people want to buy it. And I'm going to be ridiculously optimistic about it. And for a dyslexic who struggles in education and struggles with exams, and all of a sudden you've got this world where actually the judgment isn't this one individual who's great at setting tests, but it's actually of a market that's going to decide whether what you've created is any good. I mean, that's so attractive to dyslexics because they don't give a shit if your spelling's wrong or if you don't know what 8 times 8 is.
Yeah.
No one cares. What they care is, like, can Simon produce an amazing product that people want to buy time and time again? Will they come back to them? Do they think, and that's why you get, so many dyslexics start businesses. I mean, good friend of mine, Jamie Waller, who wrote the Dyslexic Edge and is very outspoken dyslexic and a brilliant guy. I mean, he talks about it all the time. It's like, why are so many dyslexics into entrepreneurship? It's like, well, it's where the world judges rather than education. And so I think naturally I was drawn to that. My dad is also heavily dyslexic. It often runs in the genes, and he's always been an entrepreneur. So I've just been brought up around entrepreneurship as well. And so if I wasn't in venture capital, which is investing into entrepreneurs, then I think I would have gone down the entrepreneurial route. The other great thing about entrepreneurs is they're brave people who have got balls and have got risk appetite. It's such a thing to turn around and just kind of say, I'm going to put myself out there, and if I fail, everyone's going to know about it. Like takes a certain type of individual to have the courage to do that. I do sometimes wonder whether I would ever have had the courage to do that, or whether the cozy world of venture capital allows me to kind of get my fix without having to take the risks that the entrepreneurs do.
I don't know about cozy life. Yeah, on a personal level, that's why I love dealing in that early stage software space as well. You just meet these such like charismatic entrepreneurial kind of spirits. Okay, so look, in one of your previous posts, I saw you shared a quote from a blog by Thomas Wolfe, and it said, "We don't need an A+ student who can answer every question with general knowledge. We need a B student who sees and questions what everybody else has missed." So with that in mind, like how can companies shift their hiring mindset to recognize and value the unique problem-solving abilities of neurodiverse talent rather than focusing solely on traditional markers of success like schooling, uni, and other things like socioeconomic backgrounds?
It's such a broad question. I mean, that quote, is, you think about it as alongside AI and what's happening with AI and really for a long time now, memory recall hasn't been that important a kind of skill set to have. With AI, it's almost irrelevant, and so actually, it's the ability to question that, because AI is effectively recalling information. That's all it can do, or it can put together existing ideas and try and create new ones from existing thinking patterns. So I do think these skills are really important in terms of what companies can do. The first thing is really easy, which is look internally. And I'm always surprised. You'll have an absolutely fantastic, I don't know, whatever they might be. They might be the executive assistant, but you can tell straight away that they're going to be, they're just different in terms of the fact the work ethic's amazing. They're coming up with ideas. They're going extra mile. Maybe their background wasn't classical kind of Oxbridge educated type things, but there is something there. And if they show a willingness and a passion, but it's like, if you put a brick wall in front of them, why would you do that? Like, why not go internally? The easiest thing you can do, absolutely the easiest thing any company can do, is go, who are my best performers in whatever role they are doing, who work the hardest, and then figure out how far you can take them. And I think it's really unfortunate that companies, they're almost scared, almost paralyzed to do that. To take somebody from customer service who might be one of the more lower paid roles and say, well, this person's brilliant. Like, why don't we just give them I don't know what the next role is in your company. Let's try them out. Let's see what they've got. And let's give them the opportunity to make offers and to try new things. So that's the first thing. I think internal mobility is the most underrated and the most underused way of progression. And there's some form of, I think there's a bit of elitism in there as well. If I'm honest, like, ultimately people from higher socioeconomic backgrounds tend to get the better paid jobs because they're more aware of what those jobs are, they're more aware of the routes to those jobs, and people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds tend to get the less paid jobs. And there's almost like a snobbery at times that the people on those kind of those upper graded jobs, if you like, don't want to let the people from below up, even if they're brilliant. But I'm probably getting a bit, I don't know, too philosophical for this question. And the next thing to do is think really hard. I think there's about how CVs form. I think people should pay more attention, not to just the kind of the end result of somebody's education or work life, but also the route in which they have taken. Trying to see through the CV and going, well, actually, if depending what that background of that individual is, have they taken a more difficult route? Should they be given more credit? And I'm not saying that it's like in a positive discriminatory way, because I don't believe necessarily that's either helpful. But if you have come through a much more difficult path and you have achieved whatever you've achieved, then that should have credit to it as well. And then finally, I think really designing assessments that don't judge people just on the basis of what the assessor is good at. It's back to that kind of educational piece of the people setting the exams are grading the individuals. It's like, can we think about this that allows people to use more holistic thinking and more problem solving thinking than just, okay, well, can you do this 20 page problem solving maths test? It's just like, well, what about creation? What about thinking laterally? So I just think it's difficult to do at scale, but if you can produce hiring methods whereby people are really able to show creativity, then you'll get much better outputs.
Okay. Diversity of all types is a growing conversation in the VC community and tech in general, which is kind of why we're trying to shed a bit more awareness on it today. How do you think that venture capital can do more to support underrepresented founders and create more of a level playing field?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of different ways you can kind of break people into different diverse groups, and I don't think there should be any sort of hierarchy. And there's been, for me, there's one group in particular within that diversity conversation that is very underrepresented in venture capital. So, if you think that, I think it's something like 6.5% of the population went to private school, or a private school. So we use that as the marker for upper socioeconomic background of some sort. If you look at the number of venture capital partners that went to private school, that's well up over 70%. So if you think about you've got 6.5% of the 6.5% of the population are deciding effectively where capital is allocated into fast-growing, sort of the UK's fast-growing companies. It's quite scary. It's quite scary, really underrepresented. And you could then look at both ethnicity and gender, and they are well underrepresented as well. I think there's been a lot of this is personal opinion, I should say, not necessarily Octopus opinion, but there's been a lot of I think posturing around diversity in terms of people very concerned about the outcome. I'm more interested in how we can change it from the grassroots up. Personally, I think you ultimately you ultimately get more of diversity if you sort of bring more people into the system, and that means educating the system. So, like, I've run a work experience week for many years now at Octopus, where I get incredible speakers from all over the place to come in and talk about venture capital and early stage investing to a group of children, or young people, I should say, they're sort of 16 to 18, about venture capital. And they will have never heard that term. I mean, I don't know about you, but I never heard, growing up in a kind of bog standard state school, I had no idea what an investment banker was. I had no idea what a venture capitalist was. These weren't job titles that people like me were ever made aware of, and didn't necessarily. And I know British don't like talking about money. I had no idea what an investment banker earned. None. I had no idea what a corporate lawyer would earn. like if you say a corporate lawyer earns like £500,000 a year, if somebody had said that to me when I was, I don't know, 15 years old, 16 years old, I'd have been like, I remember like on The Apprentice when they used to give jobs away at 100,000 a year, and I just thought that is
Yeah.
insane. I thought that is insane that somebody had earned £100,000 a year. It was a few years back now, but like, and it is a lot of money. Like, don't get me wrong, these
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
big,
Yeah.
well above the average earnings. But part of it is that people aren't educated about what people can earn. They just aren't educated.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, if there's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, whereas if your dad was an investment banker or a corporate lawyer or a private equity investor or whatever, you generally just know about these industries. And so I actually think that the best thing that we can do is, rather than worrying about trying to get 1% more of a certain diverse characteristic at the top, is actually going and trying to educate a population of people who have no idea what these jobs are about, to try and be interested and be excited and not just want to become professional footballers, or whatever it might be.
Yeah. No, it's
I was rubbish at football, so that's probably where I'm.
that's cool. Yeah. Okay. You've done some work with Diversity VC on the representation of VC partners from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. What did your research find, and were you surprised?
Yeah. So my research found the stat. Actually, my good friend Antler, David, his stat actually was a bit higher. So I said sort of over 70% plus of VC partners come from private educated backgrounds. His research found it was closer to 80%.
Okay.
Once you add in grammar schools, and I think the other thing that's quite shocking is where you do have people that are from a state background, they almost all went to Oxbridge. So and so what you're ending up doing is it's like, are you catering for the 1% of the 93%? Like, I don't think we solve social mobility problems by this obsession that we have over getting state educated people into Oxford and Cambridge and maybe Durham and Bristol. It's like, we
Yeah.
have to try and raise much greater proportions of people, and some people will be late starters. That's the other thing. I was very late in my educational journey to really
Mm.
understand how it worked for me. So it's really, it upsets me when I think about the fact that unless you're a genius state educated child at age 11, you're basically screwed, because that your path has been set for you in a way that's just not
Mm.
the case for people from upper social mobility backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds. So, was I surprised at the data? Not really, if I'm honest. I mean, look, I live it every day, so
Yeah.
I'm kind of used to it. I wasn't that, but what I think is, what I was really surprised at is the reluctance of the community to engage in the conversation. So the community is very, very, the venture capital community, this is very happy to
Yeah.
talk about gender diversity, ethnicity diversity, social mobility and socioeconomic diversity. Feels very uncomfortable
Okay.
and maybe that's just because so much of the population is from a privately educated background that that's why. So yeah, I think David Houghton over at Antler's doing some incredible work with social mobility ventures, but trying to just get us into the conversation, really.
Yeah. Do you think it will always be like that, or do you think in time that uncomfortability will soften as awareness
Um,
builds,
I don't know. It's been
or
like that for a few thousand years, I guess. So it's probably not going
yeah, I
to happen.
guess, yeah.
It's not going to happen quickly. And the way the world is right now is there's probably
Yeah.
people are feeling happier about not paying that much attention. And so
Yeah.
I like to be an optimist, though. I like to be positive and like to think positively, and I see a lot more going on right now than there ever has before. Obviously, that has softened over the last couple of years, where DEI has become more of a kind of has-been term. But I still think there's a lot of people trying to do the right thing.
Mm.
We shall see. We shall see. Time will
Hmm.
tell. But I don't. Just because it's difficult, it doesn't mean to say we shouldn't try in whatever little corner of
Mm.
the world that we're in.
Mm. Yeah, agreed. What advice or guidance would you give to somebody from a non-traditional background who aspires to enter the venture capital or B2B SaaS industry?
Well, I think that the first thing is a good mentor of mine. My job was actually in San Francisco working for the Chamber of Commerce, and my first boss was a kind of proper old school guy, Mostyn Lloyd OBE, always used his title at the end. And
Like it.
he taught me tenacity and perseverance. It's like, the main thing is not to give up, to keep kind of knocking on the doors. I'm a big advocate. A lot of the time you don't jump from where you are today to where you want to be, in however many years' time. And you may not even know where you want to be in however many years' time. But I think there's such I talk to a lot of people, young people, and they sort of go, right, well, how do I get a job in VC today? And I'm like, well, you probably can't, because quite honestly, you've not come from an investment bank or an accounting firm. You've not, whatever it is, your background isn't right. So what I would say is like, okay, well, what's half a step to it, or three quarters of a step to it? Like doing something is better than doing nothing. And you don't know whether that's a waste of time or whether that's going to work, but I think you have to try and work in increments much more. So like for me, I worked for Rolls-Royce. I hated that big company mentality, just didn't suit me. Then worked for a startup for 4 years, which was great, but we started to kind of plateau a little bit. And I knew then that I wanted to get into venture capital. And so it was like, I'd helped build this startup. It'd gone quite well. But my half a step into a VC career was to be on the fundraising side rather than the investment side, which I was like, well, okay, it's not what I want to do, but I'm now in the door, like I'm now in the building, of where the investments get made. So I can, and I can hang out a bit and I can be annoying or whatever to then, and then again, like I made within Octopus, I've probably had about 8 different careers where I've just moved half a step closer to ultimately where I wanted to get to, which is, where I am today, which is the partner of a fund that's making lots of investments and is super exciting.
Yeah.
So yeah, my advice would be is like, if the full step is not there for you, where's the half step or the quarter step?
Yeah. I think I watched on a previous podcast you did with somebody else. You talked a little bit about that career journey of you moved into, you saw as you say, you saw the end goal, but you moved into, almost took like a pay cut, like a demotion almost, to then like try and work your way into the like seat you're in now. Is
Yeah, I mean,
that true?
I took 3 different demotions at Octopus over different times.
Yeah, that's interesting.
In terms of like, which were all strategic. Now I start effectively.
Yeah.
I knew. Think about it as ladders as well. Like I knew that if I could get on the investment ladder, wherever I was on that ladder, I could then work my way up on that ladder. So I started, and I'd had a decent job at Rolls-Royce, and I'd as the startup, I was kind of one of the leaders of the startup that was talking to large customers, FTSE 100 companies, and all this. And then all of a sudden, I did administrative work. I started my kind of investment career doing the minutes and filing the notes and all of this sort of stuff. So like, I think the other, just make sure nothing is beneath you in terms of what you're willing to do. And the way that I sort of see it is like, so nail your primary job. You have to nail your primary job. So if my primary job is to take the minutes, to make sure the filing's done properly, to make sure none of the administration is messed up as it was when I was effectively an analyst, get that absolutely nailed and do it really well, which hopefully I did. And then once you've done that, that allows you to then do the other stuff around the side, like volunteer to maybe do the first draft of an investment paper, or maybe do some research into a company that people want to invest into. You've not been asked to do that, but you can sort of start to make offers and you can start to volunteer. So it's like, number 1, nail your job. Number 2, start to make those offers and start to kind of see where you can put your time to work and be a bit innovative with it. And I think I was good at doing that. Like I said, nailing my primary purpose and then doing bits on the side of my desk and just working relentlessly through my 20s in order to build a reputation.
Yeah, I think that links back into that EA comment you made about like maybe seeing the bigger potential in people as well. If you're showing them that you've got these other skills that you can offer, and giving them, more value over and above. So that's interesting. Okay, cool. So look, many startups struggle with unconscious bias in hiring. I certainly see it. Yeah. Have you seen any successful strategies that companies can implement to ensure they attract talent from a mixture of backgrounds?
Yeah, my first thing is to look for them, like look for people from different backgrounds. And I know that sounds a bit obvious, but like in my world, if we put a post up for an associate level um, venture capital associate, we'll have about 2,000 applicants in a week.
Yeah,
It's a very sought
mental.
after position. And but the thing is, you put it on your LinkedIn. So guess what? All the your connections on LinkedIn broadly have similar experiences to you, similar paths to you, or people who are looking for similar paths or similar experiences. And therefore, like what you're going to get is a lot of clones of yourself, or people that are kind of trying to clone themselves toward that way. That's probably not a great metaphor, but you know, if you say, okay, well, even though we've got 2,000 applications from these people, why don't we go and like, so there's people like Newton Venture Partners, Diversity VC, Included VC. There's organizations whose sole focus is to try and get people from different backgrounds within to our venture capital community. And, I think if you go out to those universes as well, and you kind of make it very clear that like this kind of the opportunity is more open than maybe it
Yeah,
than maybe it first seems, and that we'll look at everybody seriously, then I think you can hire more diversity. I mean, I think just being really conscious. So like unconscious biases will always will always be there. So like that is human nature. We are not going to all of a sudden remove the human nature of the fact that we're all biased. It's the way the brains work. Can't help it. So you have to first acknowledge that, and then you have to kind of try and work around it. One thing that I find really interesting is that if we hire at associate level, the applications we get are predominantly male. So we'll get, I don't know, somewhere in the region of 90% male
wow.
applicants for an associate job. If we hire at analyst level, it will be probably still predominantly male, so maybe 70, but it'll be more like 70-30. But what's interesting is a lot of that 30 female applications at analyst level is as good, if not better, than most of the associate level in the male applicants. And so there is, I think you have to be very careful. If you're like, you have to recognize that for whatever socio constructs have happened, it means that people from different diversities maybe don't feel like they can apply for a slightly more senior role unless they've ticked every single box on the list, and therefore
Mhm.
you want to make sure that however you're asking for applicants, you've done it in such a way that allows people from more underrepresented groups to still apply for those jobs, even if they don't feel they've ticked every single box. I don't know exactly how we get around that at Octopus. There's part of me that thinks we should hire for associates, but market for analysts. So actually go out there and be like, he wants to be an analyst, and then say it's actually an associate role. But I do find that fascinating. I don't have a perfect answer, but it's clear from when we've done recruitment that people from underrepresented backgrounds tend to feel like they need to check more boxes.
Yeah, yeah, complex problem. Um, okay, Octopus Ventures is obviously backed some incredible companies. I mean, you mentioned there about the size of the fund and what you're doing in the space, including B2B SaaS companies like Logify, Natterbox, Definely, Value Blue. I mean, and many others you'll see on the website and in the space. What do you think kind of sets apart startups that truly succeed and grow than those that struggle?
I mean, that is talk about complex questions. That is very complex because the amount of different things that can happen
Yeah, of course, of
is
course.
massive. And we talk a lot about product market fit
Yeah,
and thinking about product market fit. At the early stages, companies might not have it, but like what ultimately makes a company succeed is where I think it has sort of three core ingredients, which is a very clear vision of what it's trying to do. So, why is it here? It is here to make XYZ industry better. Then it has to have customer engagement into it as well. So For example, I'll give you like, Google Glasses, for example. Like everybody knew what
Yeah.
Google Glasses were. The vision was amazing. You wear glasses, you can get information. No customer, customers just didn't want it. Ultimately,
Yeah.
it was a great vision for a product, but it wasn't one where there was in customer engagement. So you have to have both the vision and customer engagement. And then finally, you need the ability to scale. So can you repeat what you've built time and time again without just layering on more and more and more cost? And so, if you get that right, and the market is big enough, so if you've got a solid vision and you stick to that vision, customers love it and customers are engaging with it, and finally you've got the ability to scale, then you're going to build a very, very big business very, very quickly. So they're the sort of three ingredients. Now, if you don't have any one of those three, then it doesn't really matter what you do, because you can have engagement, but with no vision and with no scalability, you're just going to very quickly build. Like I often think, how do I try and think of an example, but like maybe a consulting firm that's kind of saying, well, we'll build anything for anybody really, really cheaply. It's like, yeah, customers will engage with you building anything really cheaply for them, but you can't scale that business and there's no real purpose or vision to it. You're just offering a cheap service to people. So customer engagement alone is not enough.
Of those three pillars, can the scaling aspect be taught? The mission, the vision, and is that just something people have or they don't when you're qualifying these opportunities, or like how do you work through that?
Can the scaling aspect be taught? I think the answer is yes to that. So I talk a lot. I've done quite a few blogs around losing product market fit.
Yeah.
So for example, you might have a recruitment firm, and the recruitment firm's the vision and mission of it is, we are going to find the best people for the UK's fastest growing tech companies. That might be your vision, your mission. You might even be getting some good engagement from your customers, and you look at scalability. It's like, well, do you scale in such a way where you have to have a personal representative for each one of the companies that you represent? Maybe that is scalable. I don't know. But in many industries, that's just not scalable. Like, you can't. If you take that down to say something like mental health help, if your solution was to give every single person their own individual on-demand therapist, that is not going to work. That is not a scalable solution. So you can sort of start to talk about, okay, well, how do we scale? And then the problem is that so we go back to the example of the recruitment firm who is trying to help fast-growing tech startups. All of a sudden, I don't know, Google comes along and says, hey, we want to come in and we want to give you 20 jobs. They're all C-suite and they're all going to be kind of executives. It's like, well, how does that impact on your vision? Now you've gone around telling everybody that you work with startups and fast-growing companies, and now you're working with a large, or even worse, maybe British American Tobacco comes and says, hey, can you hire for our C-suite? Do you then take that on? Because they're going to pay you a big fee. But what does the website like? What does the branding look like of the business? What does that mean to the individuals within it? What does that mean to the sales team? They can't sell against that. And so you might have had product market fit, you might be growing, but you've now lost it because you've basically gone and chased the next big whale over here, which is completely off your vision. And so working with founders a lot of the time is saying, actually, as you start to grow, you're going to have a huge amount of noise around you. Everyone is going to be pulling you. Like, people love to hang on to success. Can you do a bit of this? Can you do a bit of that? Can you end up in this sector or that sector? And part of it is going, no, what makes us stand out is that we are this. This is what we are. This is what our vision is, and this is what is scalable. And so you spend a lot of time with founders who get dragged all over the place. I've got a friend who's a financial planner, and she started a financial planning firm, and she's got a very good, strong idea of what she wants to be. I've spoken to her a number of times where somebody over here wants me to do something over here for them, which is completely different from somebody over here. Success has many friends, and I think for a founder that can be very, very devastating if you all of a sudden look at your business 3 years down the line and go, well, hang on a sec, this was not my vision, and what I've got is this Frankenstein of a company which is completely unmanageable, completely unscalable.
Yeah. Yeah. I watched on LinkedIn yesterday. They had a video that popped up, and it was a bit triggering. It said like the key to a good strategy is making your customers unhappy. And then he sort of paused, and what he meant was, but you've got to really focus that segment that obviously don't fit the mission, as you put it. You're perfectly fine with them being unhappy, but it's the bit that does fit your mission you completely double down on. And that's, I think that was an interesting kind of like little thing you did on stage. But yeah, I mean, you have limited resources as well, right?
And the
Being a
founders get that
generalist doesn't
wrong. Yeah,
help
I mean,
every.
founders
Yeah,
really don't understand that. It's like every moment you're spent.
yeah.
So I call it so there's it's famously Netflix called it the Canada problem,
Okay.
where there was a point in Netflix development where they had the opportunity to go to Canada, and they worked out that they could increase revenues by about 10% if they went to Canada, and they decided against it, not because they didn't like Canadians, but because Canada has different rules, regulations, postal service. It has to be in the French language. It has to blah, blah, blah. And they were like, it's not so much that we don't want to be in Canada. It's more to the problem that every minute we're spent on Canada is a minute that we're not spending on the USA.
The
And so
US, yeah.
yeah, and so just and there will be a moment in time when that is the right thing to do. But if you're growing
Yeah.
really, really fast in your existing space, then you know it's a terrible idea to then try and distract yourself
Yeah.
away by trying to find and go after a different one. And likewise, actually, if things are not going well in your existing space, you might need to find a new one. But almost certainly, if that might be the right decision to make, and you should make it, but you should make it very consciously. This is not working, therefore we need to. But if it's kind of actually your space is sort of working, and then you try a different space, you try a different sector or whatever, you're going to do so much damage. See this all the time
Mm,
with UK technology companies that go to the US too early. It's like,
mm,
we're actually doing all right in the UK, we're growing quite well, let's go and launch an American office. Well, that is a massive distraction. So unless you're absolutely sure that's the only way through it, you're better off just continuing to double down and building a moat in the UK or Europe. And that's very hard to do because as you become successful, opportunity is everywhere, and actually the decisions you don't make, the things that you don't do, is that can often be better decisions than the ones you actually take.
mm, I see that as well, the US thing, 100%. Are there any, just on that, are there any like markers that you advise your portfolio companies when the right time is to go to the US?
For me, it's when the UK business becomes more self-sustaining because I think generally the rule is you need either CEO or somebody very senior to be in the US when you do tackle the
Yeah,
US. So to go into the US market without like CEOs like break down. I mean, you know this, but like break down walls. They burn their black book and they call everybody 100 times to get what they need. Like
yeah,
nobody else does that. Actually, nobody else will do that
yeah.
apart from founders and CEOs. So that's the person that you need to go and tackle the large markets, not somebody that you've hired that is like, well, I'll make a few calls, but they're not going to run
Mm,
through walls, and you're probably paying them a big salary for doing so. So like
mm,
I want to see that the UK's expansion and go to market strategy and that is working, because if it's not, if that's struggling, going to the US is going to make things 10 times worse. And if in it,
mm.
I don't know, if you're a 2-3 million pound revenue business in the UK, you're not big enough yet to
Yeah.
justify that you're going to necessarily. For me, you need to be at sort of 5-6 million pounds worth of recurring revenues before even thinking about going to the US. But for all of these things, there's a success story that disproves my rule. But in
Yeah,
general,
yeah,
say
yeah,
UK
yeah,
sustaining, and then CEO goes over to the US to launch and try and
yeah.
build a sustaining business in the US.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, you're totally right. Like some companies just, right macroeconomic situation, right time, right products. They sort of fluke it.
Yeah,
Um, Sometimes maybe a bit of desperation when things aren't going well. They're like, trying to get their hooks into a bigger addressable market. But that could be the end of them, as you say, right? If it's too distracting and too resource heavy. Um, you touched upon there just a couple of points, but what are there any real major themes that you see that founders get wrong when they kind of take VC funding from your experience, from Octopus or within your peers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one along that is when they take funding. I think it feels like that funding will last forever, and what they do is they let costs run ahead of revenues too quickly, and we've certainly seen that over the
Mm,
last 5 years with companies. You see it's been a difficult time for technology because of overhiring post COVID, and I
mm.
think it's that when you've been running on a shoestring and done organic growth, then all of a sudden you got 5 million quid in your bank account. It feels like it will never end. But actually, if you allow costs to get ahead of revenues, it's actually massively disruptive to the business. Hiring lots and lots of people has the opposite effect to what people think, because you now got to induct those
Yeah,
people, you've got to train those people, you've got to find people to manage them, you've got to put in all these processes, and so it's actually value detrimental, certainly to start with, to go on this huge hiring rush. And so certainly with my companies, the first thing I do is here's the money, now don't hire anyone. Don't do anything. Like, be very disciplined in your hiring,
mm,
um, and be very disciplined in the way in which you manage cost still. Because if you're not, then that money will run out faster than you can believe. And then
yeah,
another thing I think they get wrong, and I've talked about this before, is that they get their go-to-market strategy wrong. So they believe that now the founder's probably been the head of the go-to-market strategy and has been, again, running through walls, and they think, oh, right, we'll just hire somebody and they'll come in and they'll make this big difference. And in actual fact, that goes wrong very quickly, and the founder has to come back in again. And so, for me, it's like the founder needs to stay around in that go-to-market unit until such time as there's a clear machine that's been built. If the machine hasn't been built, then do not step away from it, because you're headed for a disaster. And by machine, I mean you understand how many leads are coming in, you understand what the conversion rates are, and you understand what's coming out the other end. If you don't understand those funnel metrics, then you need to stay in, and I would not risk allowing the former vice president of Oracle's EMEA team to come and do that for you, because that's a recipe for disaster.
yeah. Yeah, I probably shouldn't agree with you around the headcount comments because, obviously
You
being in
know,
the recruitment business, but I hear it all the time. And I'm seeing some amazing examples of just companies scaling to crazy levels, just leveraging sort of AI, like in just a handful of like wildly profitable, like 10 full-time employees and like 15 million ARR or 10 million ARR. It's really cool. Like that's definitely a shift that I'm seeing.
yeah, really cool, really scary. Really, it's questionable what the sustainability is of those
Yeah,
ARR.
not sure. Yeah.
The churn rate in the companies that we're looking at is often very, very high, because people are trying
Yeah.
these tools and going, "Oh, that's nice," and then coming out of it. But I think over the next 10 years or 5 years, even 3 years, the world of work is going to change, and software development in particular, beyond recognition.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay,
that's
cool.
probably a whole nother
Conscious we've only got a
podcast.
couple of minutes. Yeah, I was going to say a whole nother conversation. That's fascinating, right? The whole Copilot development stack is in that space is amazing, really. 2 minutes left. I know you probably got something more exciting to get onto. Finally looking ahead. What's the